It is nothing more than a pain in the neck to strip off old paint. It's one job that every do-it-yourselfer dreads. There's a new item, though, on the market that is taking some of the drudgery out of this chore. It's the electric heat gun, like this one. But if you plan on buying one, you should know this. A heat gun may look somewhat like a hairdryer, but the heat it puts out is far more intense. The airflow produced by a heat gun is hot enough to melt plastic, char wood, and even blister paint, which is exactly what they're intended to do. But beside the obvious dangers from burns, removing paint with a heat gun can also produce toxic fumes and dust, especially if it's used on old lead-based paint. Lead hasn't been used in interior paints for years, but lead-based paints are still found on home exteriors, on painted furniture, or hidden beneath coats of new paint in some older houses. And according to the Poison Control Center, it doesn't take much of that old lead paint to poison you.
If you had a paint chip the size of my thumbnail, and you applied a heat gun to that paint chip and released lead into the air, it could release lead that would be 100 times more than any kind of an acceptable daily intake.
Dr. Bayer says the dust and fumes from leaded paint can actually contaminate your entire house with potentially disastrous consequences.
If you use this gun and apply it to a lead-based paint and get it on your skin or clothing or furniture or carpeting, it can remain there, and an infant can crawl around and get poisoned by skin contact with it, by licking it, by getting it a continual breathing of the dust. And that infant could possibly be permanently brain damaged.
The Poison Control Center recommends that people using heat guns to remove old paint protect themselves against dust and fumes by wearing a face mask, goggles, and gloves. Clothing should be separately washed so that other clothes cannot be contaminated with lead. If the work is being done inside, then special precautions should be taken to make sure there is adequate ventilation. Surprisingly, there is nothing printed on heat gun packaging warning users of the dangers of lead poisoning. The St. Louis, Missouri Poison Control Center petitioned the Consumer Product Safety Commission to require such warning labels on all heat guns. But the Consumer Product Safety Commission refused. The agency's reasoning was that if consumers were warned not to use heat guns on lead-based paints, they might resort to even more hazardous methods of removing the paint, such as using a propane torch. The Consumer Product Safety Commission decided instead to work with people in the paint industry to develop guidelines for the removal of leaded paints and to encourage manufacturers to make the information available to consumers. Now, that's not a bad idea, but I don't agree that it takes the place of printed warning labels on heat guns. And I hope the Consumer Product Safety Commission rethinks its decision not to require such warning labels on heat guns.